Hello everyone, today I'll be doing a video essay on the game Neva. It's very similar in its art style to that of Gris and has a similar symbolic style of conceptual storytelling, and I will point out right away that we'll be opening with spoilers. Symbolism is everywhere in this game, and for me it took a couple of playthroughs to gather my thoughts on what it all meant, or rather I should say, what it all meant to me. If you read anything online, the themes in general are parenting and inevitable change, with enemies being likened to climate change or parenting challenges. But, like any art form and symbolism, I think that there can be multiple meanings stamped into this work, and I will say straight away that I will not apologize for some of my cynical and maybe grim take on what I think it's trying to say. So, let's dive in. The opening sequence of this game is actually a foreshadowing of the end. We see a lush landscape in a beautiful world full of vegetation and life. But we then see a bird suddenly die and fall from the sky, only to sprout black flowers. It's found by a small grey pup and our playable character, Alba, with a larger white wolf following behind. This white wolf is Neva. Our characters then are overwhelmed by a horrific, near featureless black mass that reaches out with many arms and faces. The face is only denoted really by eyes. Alba wakes afterwards to find Neva dead, and is joined by the pup, and they comfort each other. So we're off to a gut punch of a start, and this game takes place in 4 chapters, denoted by the seasons, and take place before the introduction cutscene. We open in summer, and Neva is a pup, and like you might expect of a child, or a pup, the pup is curious and playful, and at times needs guidance. In this chapter, we really build on the concept of parenting and immersing the player in that experience of being a caregiver, be it to a pet or to a child. Between the game Gris and Neva, the interesting part is that I actually became a parent, and I can say hand on heart that the themes followed here are all too similar to the parallels of parenting. From providing sustenance to the ability to allow Neva to play, but also to allow the pup to experience more dangerous challenges, and of course for the pup to fail, to fall, and to encourage her to overcome the challenges. And once overcome, to be happy with that and be excited by this breakthrough, as any parent who's experienced sleep regression can probably tell you. Neva is curious, but also a little nervous and requires encouragement. She also gets herself into trouble and requires a loving hand to bring her back into this world. This world seems perfect. It is lush and green and full of life, seemingly living in some kind of natural order. That is until we see our first patch of this black featureless goop, and it seems to infect its surroundings, draining them of colour, life, and replacing them with something that is somehow less than it was before. The tree breaks and floats in an unnatural way, and this is the first seeds of fear of a world that is beginning to change, to become unrecognisable to us. As we travel further, more of the land is affected by this darkness. Long, spindly hands reach out from the earth, the trees and the grass are blackened. Things are changing and are becoming something else, something darker. This darkness soon physically begins to threaten our characters. Alba, who is the parent, is the one equipped to take a stand and to push it back in order to protect Neva, just as a parent would do to protect a child from harm. We are eventually faced with the real enemy of sorts. It has a body of black, somewhat featureless and amorphous, and its arms or legs are long and spindly. It moves in an almost animalistic manner. Its face is that of a simple white mask. As the chapter continues, we enter night, and these creatures seem somewhat docile at night. They feed on the black flowers that sprout out of a somehow corrupted nature. They seem indifferent to our presence, yet, at night, the world seems maybe safer to them. It's dark, and they can more easily spread their thorns to corrupt more of the landscape. Our main enemy is shown to us several times, an enormous creature similar to those we've already faced. It screeches out at our presence. Eventually we face it, and it gives chase. Its very presence spreading thorns of corruption through the ground. And then comes a somewhat scary moment. We're separated from Neva. At this point, I personally began to worry. As a parent, there is always those times where your child seems to disappear. You look away for a moment, and you look back and they're gone. And thanks to the character building of the start, you're supposed to be worried about Neva. Less so than you are for yourself. You can defend yourself, of course. You have the tools to survive. But what about Neva? Eventually, we face this creature again, and this time, we must take a stand. After a short battle, we take our sword, and with Neva's help, we break its mask. And the creature seems to turn back to normal life, releasing its energy maybe that it took up as it grew into this corrupted, featureless thing. So why did I open by saying I wouldn't apologize for my interpretation? I haven't really spoken about my interpretation yet. So what I could say is that this world is changing, and the impeding onset of climate change and climate disasters we can fight against in some kind of futile way, but that there is this life force almost pushing it forward in an unnatural way, something much larger and more powerful than us. We can also do something maybe more obvious and say that the enemies are indicative of the oil industry. Their bodies are, in fact, oil, and what we see, this black stuff, is the oil, which is somehow infecting the world and destroying it at the same time. Well, you see, that's the issue. That wasn't actually my first take on it. From the first moments I saw what was happening to this world and its life, I thought about modern politics and the rise of the far right and fascism. I will also admit that the oil narrative could be the more correct one. It's just that there's certain parts of the game which I feel are really blatant in terms of its references to politics rather than oil. The world does have this obsession, almost cult-like, with its lust for oil and wealth, and maybe it's all one and the same. That being said, the far right and fascism, they love oil, so maybe it is one and the same. And I derive this largely because they love oil simply because it annoys other people. Or at least they feel like it annoys people. Already I can probably feel the cries of people spamming the dislike button and throwing their arms in the air. But if you'll even have a slightly open mind, just stick with me. As we move on through fall, we are back in a little burrow. But rather than it being lush and green, nearly half of it has been affected by this darkness, this corruption. Neva is now more of an adolescent, stronger, larger, but also maybe a bit too bold and overconfident. A very typical teenager from the outset. The world has begun to change. The rot has set in quite deeply. This area, thanks to Neva and Alba, is free from the roaming creatures, denoted by the scores of dead ones that have been sprouted back to life thanks to Neva. But the decay continues to grow. The cute part here is that Alba can actually scold Neva as if to say, "Hey, drop it." So, fascism, Eros, how'd you come to that conclusion? Well, my take on the world right now is that, for whatever reason, many places have populace that feel unheard, that they see the world around them changing, and that brings with it fear. We then have insidious forces that work to amplify, to stoke and exaggerate, and to flat out lie in order to manipulate the people, turning simpler fears into something far more ugly, something more cold, hateful, and toxic. And this world has begun to change shape significantly. All of it is built on this corruption. The world, or our interpretation of society as a whole, has gone from being together, unified, and being part of an ecosystem, into being something that is fractured and isolated and drained from the rich colours of diverse life. I interpret it like this due to how the corrupted life sprouts these black flowers, which the corruption or corrupted creatures then feed upon. It's exactly a vicious cycle. And we see this in populist movements currently. They create this toxic problem and then they feed from it too. It's like how sometimes we say the right wing and the far right will invent a problem or exaggerate a problem and use it as a battle cry, where most of the rest of the world look at it and say, we don't even know that this is even an actual problem, but you guys seem very upset about it. And the whole purpose is to seed doubt, to seed that fear and to stoke it even more. So it becomes this total circle. And that's unfortunately how this kind of toxicity spreads upon itself. This world, our world, right now, is literally breaking apart. Society is cracking, and it is caused by this darkness, this corruption and hate and unwillingness to see the real world. which, going on the symbolism of this game, was a paradise, or objectively a paradise, in comparison to what it's becoming. I liken this to fascism and populism because, to me, I've experienced that fall of people into it. It's predictable. People start to quote propaganda they've read. They seem to admit that they know that it's exaggerated, but at some point they stop caring about the truth, only to seek what amplifies or validates their positions. They can look reality square on and deny it for some dry, dark, comfortable manipulation that gives them a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, a member of a group that society must change and unite under this dark banner, their banner and only their banner, and to become one of them. This world, as shown in the game, denies logic, rationality, and in the same way denies the existence of gravity as the rocks and platforms begin to float. We're given a demonstration of this logic as we face our next boss of sorts, a group of the corrupted sitting without aim or purpose till one rises and consumes the others to become something bigger and stronger. The masks seem to scream out in pain as though they realized at this moment they didn't really want to be part of this, but from 5 bodies there are 4 faces, and those 4 faces do not have control. So to what end is all this? Typically with a political movement there is some kind of unifying figure. Oh wait, that's right, we have shown it in this chapter. This is the so-called Queen of Corruption, who, like the followers, is an amorphous black creature with a face denoted by a white featureless mask. The body is made up of seemingly consumed followers who now seem to writhe in agony that maybe their choice was a bad one, and that their want to follow and to be part of this movement was ultimately robbed them of their form, their individuality, and their free will. They claw hopelessly to escape it, but they can't. They're now part of the Queen now, and this Queen has the ability to spread this corruption far more quickly than Alba can ever hope to combat it. And for me, this is how I feel when I look at the world. I have children who I do not want to grow up in this seemingly more hostile, bitter world where hate is valued more than love, where people will use their differences to rationalize fears as perfectly valid and true because they simply feel threatened because someone else told them they should. I feel a strong need as a parent to shield my child against this, to prepare them to live amongst it, but ultimately not fall to its toxic allure. After the smoke clears, we're shown again what should be ground level, and that's of course after the wave of corruption has washed over it. The creatures we once saw in our opening chapter are dead, food for the corruption. We fight seemingly dead and reanimated creatures as though the corruption attempts to breathe life into it, although fails to imitate anything close to what it once was when it was actually alive. I liken this to seeing our families succumb to the allures of the toxic world, not to fully become part of it, but more as an inevitable attempt to go along with it. Without being true followers, though, they are simply turned into food for the rest. Ever had a family member or friend who suddenly changed, hooked onto something that you can't really accept? I have. Where you see someone one year, seemingly a wonderful person, open and kind, only to be suckered into and taken advantage of by this deceptive nature of far-right politics, to become part of this self-fueling fire. People who can invent issues that don't exist in order to become justifiably irrational or hate other people. We all know someone who's done this. Where the symbolism becomes very poignant for me is where we see the birds, dead and sometimes frozen floating in place, victims of this corruption. Birds symbolically can mean many things, but their ability to fly is often symbolic of freedom. Here, the world has reached a point where freedom has died, the corruption is winning. Neva is symbolically able to breathe life back into these fallen creatures, but it seems like a futile battle. I liken this to the sheer resilience of children. We often don't realize how strong our children are, and that this definitely is on show during this chapter. Neva, like our children, is a symbol of the future, a beacon of hope that can cut through this darkness. Neva is also growing and developing and taking a more active role in our survival in this dark hellscape. We fight several reanimated creatures. A ball pushes us towards the edge. Our purpose is to rid it of the corruption as we contend with our own survival. We face 2 deer. Symbolically, deer can represent purity and rebirth and compassion, depending on the context and the culture. Here, I would say it really looks like compassion until death, as though two lovers did all they could to fight back against the corruption, but ultimately succumbed to it and died. The final part of this chapter is then a little bit different. We wake, and again this parental fear strikes hard. Neva is gone. We call out for our child. We're scared for her. We're scared for ourselves. And arms of corruptions reach up and out of the earth and to drag us down. This part of the game is a pure nightmare hellscape. To me, it represents our internalized view of the world and our fears. Just as those in the far right might say to us, oh, you're fear-mongering, we're not as bad as you think. And that's what this chapter really speaks to me of. It's our own view of how we see the world. And as I said before, I have a very negative view of the far right and populism and fascism, and ultimately the people who perpetuate it, either knowingly or not. For those who don't knowingly do it, I feel symbolically like they're the creatures that we face, the reanimated ones. They need to be saved and to be given back their lives if they can actually receive it. We see the world as this dark place where the ideology permeates everything and everyone. They hold up the world. They are the very bedrock. This ideology of toxic darkness is the world itself. What seems poignant to me is that the many of these creatures, these corrupted, seems to be reaching out as though they're searching or longing for something else, as though they know their state is pitiful and painful. And just as we seem powerless to do anything about it, they are powerless to escape. We see a wolf being feasted upon by the corrupted. They take over its body and the world turns red. To me, this is symbolic of Alba's fear that Neva will one day be corrupted too, that it would transform from this beautiful, hopeful creature that can give life into something dark and destructive. We ultimately find our wolf though, and Neva is a steadfast beacon of light within this darkness. We might have our fears, but our trust in her is also strong. Here we can replace any reference to Neva with that of a child. And as I said before, our children often serve as beacons of hope, reasons we keep going through thick and thin, so that they might have a better life, that they might make the world a better place. It is a hope and a fight worth dying for. We ultimately face our fears during this chapter and rise above it. Waking, we are comforted now by Neva. The nightmare is over, at least for now. We now move on to winter, and Neva is fully grown. We move through a broken wasteland which, despite its barren nature, we can still say that there is some beauty that survives, albeit as a shadow of its former self. The world is now seemingly totally corrupted as a grey, bleak, lonely place without much diversity, and is mostly formed of cold stone. The other feature of this place is that we see the corrupted, frozen in positions reminiscent of worship. We face the Queen of Corruption again as it blocks our path. She makes us fall, and under the place where we stood, we see the minions are frozen, their hands held out as though asking for help or offering worship. This is exactly my observation with populism, and the way that people often seemingly join cults of personality. They worship the object of their oppression. This thing, this leader will only harm them and hurt them for its own gain, and yet they are so sold into this corruption as though it will bring them power or elevate them, that their leader really cares, that they fail to see that they are dying. The game continues and we become aware of another wolf, a grey wolf that is larger than Neva. It helps us face overwhelming odds and makes contact with her. We're seemingly not alone in our fight against this corrupting force. One section of the game I really enjoyed was the ice mirrors. We have these sets of hidden platforms and hidden enemies. We see them only in a mirror, but not in our reality. This, for me, feels like the world where we still have a memory of what it once was, although if we let it go, our path will be lost completely. A repeating feature of this game is one of ascension and falling. We always attempt to climb towards the sky, towards the light, as we would know it. It's the only warmth and stability left in this horrid place, and yet we're always forced back down to the ground. We face a creature spawned by the Queen. Its body is formed of a wriggling mass of corrupted. They seemingly try to escape as though they realize their folly, albeit too late. We defeat it, and we face our largest challenge and fears as a parent. That is, loving your child enough to let them go, to choose their own path of their own rather than your path. Neva leaves with the grey wolf. The next part opens and we are travelling back up a frozen mountain. We are alone for the first time. We instantly see images of idol worship from the corrupted, who are frozen, dead in place. They died for their cause, and their cause is seemingly indifferent to their plight, exactly how fascism and populism ideologies work. People will vote and work actively against their own interests, their minds corrupted, their eyes blind to see the truth, that they are destroying themselves and upholding an uncaring, heartless leader. The final battle comes on top of a platform. It seems that our visions or analysis of what the Queen of Corruption has done to the world is in fact real. She stands on a pillar held up against all odds by piles and piles of dead, corrupted subjects that float in a manner that makes no rational sense. They are all reaching out and bundled together at the same time, as though desperate for acknowledgement by their queen, who, much to my description, stands on top, simply consuming her subjects mercilessly or casting them aside. They worship her, despite her very obviously destroying their individuality. Once consumed, every time they are visible in her body, they reach outwards and away as though they know it was all for naught, but it's too late. We fight this corrupting force in two stages, at first appearing to win only to be pushed back, but ultimately joined by Neva. We do beat the Queen, thanks to Neva and her ability to bring life back to this place. The Queen's mask is cracked and she has spawned green leaves. And it's not without cost. Neva sacrifices her eye and saves an unconscious Alba. We see the world begin to recover. Life, it seems, can be saved just as society can. It's a hopeful final message that, despite my cynical take on the outside world, does indeed contain light, and that we can push back against these toxic, corrupting forces that have eyes on leadership and are spreading their corruption. In our final chapter, we're back in our hidey hole with a new pup, Bruma. It's just as playful and curious as Neva once was. We take a look around. This world is full of life once more. It's beautiful, lush, and a diverse paradise. That is until we travel a little bit further, and we are faced with the Queen of Corruption's final attempt at ridding the world of what defeated it in the first place, the light and the good that exists within your child. Neva ultimately sacrifices herself so that you and her own child can go on. And the theme of parenting in this enormous gut punch, I'd say, is one huge fear of losing one's child. It seems the only natural order of things that parents should not outlive their children. We hold up Bruma and give her our love and support, just as Neva had before. So that's it. That's Neva, or my interpretation of it and what I took away from it. I know bringing politics into this is always a touchy subject, although if I'm going to give my honest take, that's what you're going to get. The game has so many parallels, in my opinion, with things like climate change, the rise of fascism, as I spoke about, and the overarching theme of parenting in a changing world, that it becomes less and less hospitable as time progresses. The only unit that you can rely on is yourself and your child in the sky above. But thankfully, the final message is happy. It says not to lose hope, that the world can sometimes seem bleak and loveless and inhospitable, but it ultimately has potential and the power to return. And the best we can do is enable our children to shine as bright as they can and to give them the tools to not let the darkness consume them. And with that said, thanks for watching.
Bye.